Hi, everyone. This is Emily from the United States Embassy in Algiers, and you're watching Let's Chat, a show on American culture produced by the American Cultural Center Algiers. We have a really fun and interesting program for you today. But first, I'd like to tell you, if you're interested in practicing your English and learning about American culture, I encourage you to go visit one of our 5 American spaces. We have American spaces in Oran, Constantine, Ouargla, and Bishar. We also have the American Cultural Center Algiers here in Algiers, but it's still closed because of COVID. So instead, we've been doing live programs like this, most Wednesdays at 6 p.m. right here on YouTube. So today we're talking about a small town in America called Elkader. This town is located in Iowa, and it's celebrating its 175th anniversary. We're going to talk about why this town in America is named after an Algerian legend, Emir Abdelkhader, and what the connection is between this town and Algeria. So my guests today are Kathy Garms and John Kaiser, who are both founders of the Abdelkader Education Project, whose tagline is, and I love this, a journey of discovery connecting continents and cultures across centuries. So Kathy Garms was a USAID volunteer in Kyrgyzstan, which led to her interest in cultural understanding and civic engagement. She revived Elkader's sister city program with Mascara, Algeria, and she's traveled to Algeria numerous times. So you're welcome to ask her questions about her travels to Algeria in the YouTube chat. I also have with me John Kaiser, who's the author of the book Commander of the Faithful, The Life and Times of Emir Abdelkhader, and he's passionate about addressing America's lack of knowledge of the Muslim faith. John and Kathy, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, Emily.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for being here with us. So I think we'll start with Kathy, who's prepared a presentation that she's going to share. So maybe, Kathy, we could start with how Elkader got its name. And let me pull up this presentation.
Could you go to there you go. Are we ready?
We're ready. Go take it away.
Hey, thank you. So who can imagine that a small town in America's heartland would be remembering a 19th century Muslim hero? Well, that is the history of Elkader, Iowa. Did Emir Abdelkhader visit America, people have asked? Well, no, actually. Next slide. So here's the story. Timothy Davis, a lawyer, businessman, and politician, migrated west from New Jersey. Next slide. Davis and his business partners founded an ideal site for a flour mill on the banks of the Turkey River, where they laid out a new settlement. Davis was given the task of naming it. Next. Timothy Davis was a man of strong character who was educated and interested in world affairs. Thanks to Lytle's living age, Davis, along with much of the world, had been following the exploits of a famous and daring Arab chieftain named Emir Abdelkhader. Next. Abdelkader received a broad education, including theology, linguistics, philosophy, along with his life skills. He was an expert horseman, a poet, statesman, great orator, and a natural leader. Abdelkader's values and personal character were perfect for a new settlement in a young country. Next. Timothy Davis considered Abdelkader a freedom fighter, a freedom fighting cousin in a David and Goliath battle against mighty France. In 1846, he named the new settlement Elkader in honor of this kindred soul. At the heart of Elkader stands the historic 1889 Keystone Bridge, which spans the Turkey River. For me, it is a symbol of building bridges of cultural understanding. Elkader's Carter House Museum includes Algerian artifacts, such as, next slide, please, this woven wool rug. There we go. It was a collaboration between the Elkader Girl Scouts and people of Tiaret. Funds were collected by the Scouts and sent to Tiaret to buy sheep. The first wool harvested was made into this rug and sent to Elkader as a gift. Just a little side note, I have been running into some of these Girl Scouts and they still remember this and they are so happy with this. Next slide. On display at the museum, you will find the 1915 Elkader High School graduating class publication, The Sheikh. It is the oldest acknowledgement in print that honors Elkader's namesake. Next. Prior to the 1950s, Elkader High School and junior college publications were called The Sheikh and the Arab Chieftain. The sports teams were called the Arabs. Next. The Elkader Mascara Sister City program began in 1984 when 10 Elkader citizens, led by the late Ed Olson and his wife Ruth, when they traveled to Mascara City to sign the documents. A youth exchange followed. Through the years, Algerian ambassadors and other Algerians visited Elkader. Next. By the end of the 1990s, most of our Algerian contacts were lost. In 2007, I revived the Sister City program with the support of Ed Olson. This led to an invitation to speak in 2008 at the Council of Nations Conference in Algiers. Next. The conference was titled Emir Abdelkhader and Human Rights. After meeting with Council of Nations Chairman Abdelkader Ben Salah, we visited Mascara City. Tours of historic sites in Algiers and Mascara were amazing. During our entire visit, we were treated royally by everyone we met. Next. In 2008, Elkader suffered a flood that destroyed over 30 homes and damaged many businesses. The Algerian president sent a message of compassion to Elkader citizens, along with a gift of $150,000 for flood recovery. Next. Shortly after the 2000 flood, we held a celebration of community spirit in Algerian Sister Cities Fellowship to honor both Independence Days. Elkader citizens gratefully acknowledged Algeria for their generous support to our flood recovery. Next. On the right is Mascara Park, beside Elkader City Hall, with a peace pole in Arabic, French, and English that reads, "May peace prevail on earth." An identical peace pole is in Mascara City. The peace poles were made by an Elkader lamp maker who donated them as gifts to both communities. Next. Today, the reclaimed flood property is public space and home to Founders Park that includes walking paths, playground, soccer fields, shelters, and access to the Turkey River. Next. So why are we even talking about a 19th century world-renowned Arab Muslim hero today? Well, in 2008, John Kaiser launched his book, Commander of the Faithful, The Life and Times of Emir Abdelkhader in Elkader. Although I am a native of Elkader, it wasn't until reading this book that I actually grew to appreciate my hometown's namesake and legacy. Commander of the Faithful inspired the Abdelkader Education Project. As AEP co-founder and a hometown girl, I work closely with Elkader City Hall to facilitate relationships between Elkader and Mascara and our countries. The Abdelkader are we still there?
We're still good, Kathy. Yep.
Oh, I lost you. Okay.
Are you on this slide or next one?
Actually, I cannot see our Zoom.
Okay, well, we're still here and I can see you, but I think we'll come back to you in a little bit. But thank you so much for that super interesting history of why a town in Iowa is named Elkader. Before we move on to John, I do want to ask you one question that just came in on the chat. El Masoud bin Salam asks, How did the founders of Elkader hear about Emir Abdelkhader in 1846? Was it a matter of newspapers at the time? Now, I know you mentioned a book that he had read about him. Could you tell us a little bit more about that book? Was it a popular book that people were reading in the 1840s?
Well, the British press puts out Lytle's Living Age, and that was actually published weekly most of the time. And so that's how the world was actually following about Abdelkader's adventures and fighting against the French colonization.
And was it difficult for this founder to convince people to name the town Elkader, or were people on board and supportive of it?
Well, what's interesting about that, we do have a theater program on our website, and it talks about how we had Gutenberg, we had McGregor, and a lot of those were last names. But with the people like Chester and Thompson, they just decided, we can't use our last names to do this. So they just let Timothy Davis decide, and he wanted that to be the name.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. We're, if you're just tuning in right now, we're talking to Kathy Garms and John Kaiser about the 175th anniversary of the founding of Elkader, Iowa, and what the connection is between Elkader, Iowa, and Emir Abdelkhader, the Algerian hero. You can ask your questions for John and Kathy in the YouTube chat, and I will relay those questions to them. But now we're going to move on to John, the author of the book that Kathy just spoke about. John, our audience are Algerians. They're watching from here in Algeria, so they might know about Emir Abdelkhader. They've probably learned about him in school, but I'm interested if you could tell us maybe a little bit more about his legacy and kind of what is his relevance in America.
I can do that, and I might also just explain how I came to know about him in the first place, because it was a multi-step process, if you will. For a good part of my career, I was interested in doing business with Russia, actually, acquiring rights to their technology for American industry. This is intellectual property. And then when Russia fell apart and was no longer viewed as the evil empire, we, of course, in America, we need to have some sort of an evil empire. So we decided it must be Islam now, because Islam was doing nasty things in the name of Islam. And so, and I was ready to change.
I'll just point out, John, sarcasm in his voice there, in case the sarcasm isn't coming through on YouTube. The perception that Americans might have that we need someone to dislike, so it's
well, we have something called a military-industrial complex, which needs lots of dollars, and those tend to come with threats. So anyway, I wanted to learn more about the new threat, and so I started learning a little bit about Islam. I tried to get to some of the essentials and found out that it's actually pretty simple and pretty much like Christianity, particularly Catholicism. And these are insights I gained from spending some time in France as a way station to getting involved with Algeria. And I decided I wanted to actually really learn something about the French-Algerian relationship and do it in some depth, but to learn through the eyes of French Trappist monks who had an order in Algeria since the 1840s, about the same time Abdelkader was still doing his thing. Having written a book about these monks, which was called what was it called, actually? Faith, Love, and Terror in Algeria, the monks of Tiberine. And when I was near completing the research for that book, I found out that the monastery that was the center of this story was sitting next to Abdelkader Rock. And I asked somebody, well, who is he? And they said, well, they explained that he was this Algerian freedom fighter who made life difficult for the French for 15 years and was a very wily and respected opponent and set new standards for treating prisoners. And so I thought, well, this is good. This is an interesting story, and not many people heard of him, and I like to restore lost history. And so I, in part thanks to some information I got from a Benedictine monk, I started preparing my next project. And when the Monks of Tiberine book came out, I decided I wanted to go and learn more about Islam and write a book about the Emir as an exemplar of good Islam. So that's how I got to know. His relevance is, for me, there's a spiritual element and there's a political element. Unfortunately, Islamophobia feeds the worst instincts of people, particularly those who are generally ignorant and they only know bad stuff. And after 9/11, there was a real scarcity of anything positive about Muslims and Islam, and so the whole culture was being kind of condemned en masse. So I thought, well, here's an opportunity to put in some new information about Muslims, and a particular Muslim, Abdelkader, who was appreciated, praised, and beloved all around the world, or at least viewed as a role model.
And how did your book go over in Elkader? Are there any Muslims in Elkader?
None at that time. There is now, I think, one Muslim bartender, but he doesn't drink, I'm told. But I think that today it goes over simply because there's no which I'm not quite sure how to put it. I would say people are kind of perplexed by it, although after the turn of the century, when we weren't in this adversarial relationship with Islam, they actually named their sports teams the Arabs, chieftains, and gave them, kind of acknowledged the Arab origins of the town. And more recently, that's made some people feel a little uncomfortable, or at least, makes it a little more peculiar. And but I don't think there's open hostility, and if there is, it's kept quiet. Kathy could tell you. I think right now, after 10 years or more of enlightenment and people reading about who he was and why he was praised and appreciated around the world, that's had an impact, a positive impact. And so this past week, last week we had the birthday party, and people came and saw artifacts and bought books and asked questions. Some of them came from as far as Washington State and Milwaukee, all around.
So you're spreading the word about who Emir Abdelkhader was and kind of fostering a unity between people possibly of different faiths and definitely people of different cultures. I know that you both started an organization, you're co-founders of an organization dedicated to this. So perhaps Kathy, you can tell us a bit about the organization?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what happened before, and I'm sorry. But getting back to where I was, the Abdelkader Education Project actually tells the Abdelkader story as history for today through education and outreach. And education means for all ages. It changes hearts and minds. And the Emir's legacy is non-threatening and is a positive message for today's troubled world. So then, a powerful statement from our college essay winner reads, Abdelkader's legacy provides a useful model for how global relationships might be rethought and restructured to better suit us all. Next.
Kathy, sorry to interrupt. Could you just explain, maybe our Algerian audience might not be familiar with the concept of an essay contest.
Oh,
What is this? Did you ask local high schoolers to write about Emir Abdelkhader?
yes. Once I realized how rich the information was about Emir Abdelkhader after reading John's book, we decided to start with young people and offer an essay contest at the local school in Elkader. And then we expanded to Iowa, then we expanded across the United States. So we did offer a very small amount for an essay prize to encourage students to want to learn about Emir Abdelkhader. And that was very good. So every year we would have an AEP forum to celebrate the winners and their educators, and also to share more about Emir Abdelkhader. And when you talked about bringing people together, when we celebrated 10 years, that was in 2018, we celebrated with our AEP forum in Washington, D.C., and that was actually in partnership with the Algerian Embassy and Wesley Theological Seminary. So that is just a thumbnail sketch of what we do with the essay contest.
What's interesting, if I can interject an additional thought, has been in the scope of acceptance and appreciation of this book and the story. And it spans public schools, seminary schools, civic groups, military, CIA, you name it. All sorts of organizations want to get insights that'll help them function better and be more intelligent and selective in how they think about Islam. So
that's really interesting. I don't know that, many people in Algeria would know that the legacy of one person who they've learned about in school is known, and that so many people are interested in it, from government organizations, military, public schools, private schools. That's really quite a scope.
Well, one of the reasons is that his way of living and thinking about his religion is very hard to argue with, because basically he believes that no religion owns God. God is greater. Whatever we think God is more. Each of us knows him in some ways and ignorant of him in others. So there's a rationality about it. The finite can't grasp the infinite. He's rational, and he's inclusive. Nobody's left out. We all know God in some ways and are ignorant of in others, and that's very appealing, particularly to agnostics or people who are not, fervent born again Christians who think there's only one door into God's tent, if you will. So there's a breadth, which is actually all fundamentally what Islam is like, although the Muslims are like Christians. I mean, they come in all different stripes and types, and there are some who, Muslims will say, well, if you don't believe in Muhammad, you can't be a real Muslim. And similarly, Christians will say, well, if you're not born again, you're going to go to hell. So I mean, you have these extremes, and then you have all kinds of gradations in between. But overall, Abdelkader is an extremely refreshing, intellectual and spiritual force, I would say, because his thinking is so widely appreciated around the world.
Thank you for that. Kathy, do you want to take it back here with these slides?
Sure. And the only reason I put my quote there is because people say, well, Kathy, what do you think about all this? And so, well, I do believe that Emir Abdelkader's legacy can influence our world, and he will remain an enduring universal beacon of hope for humanity for generations to come. I just feel that since we've been working with him so long, he is a unifier, and he was an ethical leader, and he had high moral standards. And if everybody can be guided by those qualities, that would be excellent. So then actually, as Emily stated, this last Saturday, we did celebrate our 175 years of being founded as Elkader. And Elkader's founders had no way of knowing that when they selected Elkader to be the name of our town, that they set the stage for international experiences for future generations. But it is a very rich opportunity. And we love to entertain visitors, and we like learning about the different cultures. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you for that. We have a couple questions coming in on the YouTube chat. Maybe John, I can ask you this question as the historian here. El Adli wants to know, did Americans support Emir Abdelkader's battles for independence from the French occupation? So do you know, back in the 1840s, what was America's opinion on French occupation of Algeria?
I think it was influenced somewhat by the British, who followed with glee the difficulty that the Emir was creating for the French and embarrassing them because they didn't really know what they were doing for the first 10 years anyway. But I think overall, and so there was a lot of press coverage via the British literature. But I think Americans could identify also on the level of their own experience. So we had battled British colonialism and had an experience of what that was like, which was, well, I wouldn't say it was tame compared to what the Arabs went through. It was shorter anyway. So I think there was a sympathy of, this is a little David fighting a French Goliath, and he had this incredible reputation of doing something unheard of, which is to treat his prisoners with great dignity and respect, and demanding his people to treat prisoners the same way they treat feed them and take care of them the same way any of the other people who might be, under their control. So, and I don't know if this is widely known. I think it's not, even though it's the organization hasn't been heard of. But the Geneva Convention got its early stimulus when the Swiss business guy, what's his name?
Henri Dunant.
Yeah, Henri Dunant. He was a businessman who was also concerned about battlefield ethics and just nobody caring about people who've been slaughtered and beaten up on the battlefield. And when he heard of the Emir's solicitousness towards French prisoners, and I think Arab prisoners, I'm not sure about that, but I think so, that he was inspired, Dunant was inspired to dig deeper into this and used Emir's standards of behavior towards prisoners as the nucleus of what ultimately became the Geneva Convention. Not many people know that, but there's a bust of him.
Interesting. So I'm taking in the 1830s and the 1840s throughout the world, prisoners were probably treated terribly in most places. So I suppose what Emir Abdelkader was doing felt revolutionary.
Well, it was dangerous too for the French, because most of the French army was made up of a lot of the dregs in France. They were political misfits. They were criminals. They were, people that they wanted to get rid of. So they sent them in the army. And so one of the things that kept them fighting is they say, those Arabs cats, you better watch out. You're not going to have a lot of fun with them, and they'll chop all sorts of things off. So you don't want to be captured by those Arabs. I mean, that was their clear message. And then when people were defecting and bits of news trickled back that actually, he was extremely humane. And in one case, we didn't have enough food. He just said, go, leave,
And then actors were using
that would be revolutionary. We just got a comment from Imen Mefta, who said she's mascaran and proud, and she's happy to know that there are American people who are studying this man who was a hero in peace and war. And we have a question that just came in also. Someone wants to know if, we find the question, that after that, Abdelkader traveled to some countries after his liberation in 1852. And this is El Masad bin Salam wants to know, was he ever invited to the US? Did he ever travel to the US?
I don't know. Well, I know he was never traveled to the US. Whether he was invited or not, I've never heard of an invitation being issued to him. I doubt it, but
Okay.
it's possible. But it's not. It hasn't made it into any literature that I've read.
We
But
probably
you-
would have heard. And a question for Kathy: are there any other American towns named after Algerian cities? And I would add, are there any American towns named after Arab people?
Well, not that we know of. There supposedly at one time was an Elkader, Kansas. Now, one of the stories I heard is that someone from the Elkader area went down there and they decided they would name that town Elkader. But to my knowledge, we are the only town in the United States named after a Muslim.
On the other hand, though, there are towns in the United States that are named after Arab locations, and one of them is Algiers, and which is in Louisiana, I believe. And I think you would probably find a few other places that are Arab or I don't know, Islamic names. I don't know if that's the right expression, but there are a few towns named after Arab sounding names.
I had never heard that there was an Algiers, Louisiana. That is really news to me. That's really interesting. So next question for you. So there's a current debate going on here right now in Algeria over the legacy of Emir Abdelkhader. And it kind of reminds me actually of conversations that we are having in America right now over legacies of men who we sometimes make statues for, name roads after, name universities after, name entire towns for. I'm wondering if Don or Kathy, do you have any thoughts on how we should, or if we should, honor people whose legacies become complicated with the passage of time?
Well, my personal opinion is that I was waiting for John because he's the historian actually. But personally, I think that history is history. You know, you can't really erase history. We can learn from history. But John might have a few better ideas on this.
Well, I don't know if they're better ideas. I think in the case of the Emir, one of the issues that I think come up among Muslims or among Arabs, I'm not sure. Well, I think Muslims, because it was an issue in Afghanistan, because we've been teaching Afghans and Pakistanis about the Emir and getting good responses. But there are those who view his submission to the French in 47 as sort of cowardly. He should have died with his boots on. He should have fought to the bitter end, even if it meant families, children, wives being captured, killed, and then that he got too cozy with the French in France, and he appreciated French culture, and he was supported financially by the French for the rest of his life. I mean, they set him up with a nice pension, but they also respected him. I mean, they don't do that for everybody. The French generals, French politicians, and also, British, American. I mean, he had this incredible bankers, Swiss and otherwise great fan club who respected him for the way he thought, the way he acted, and his resilience, and so on and so forth. And I think the vast majority of people who, and Muslims in particular, and I guess Algerians specifically, I don't know how it breaks out, but I do know that there are elements, just like you had and this would be a closer analogy, he's very much like Robert E. Lee, because Lee was faced with a situation similar to he was, where the army that was chasing after him was still 10 hours away. They could keep running. They could go into go into the back country even further and drag things out. And that's what some of Lee's people wanted to do. But like Lee, he said, look, this is not going to accomplish anything, just cause misery and a lot of people will die unnecessarily. Let's just acknowledge and negotiate. So he negotiated. He negotiated actually a pretty good deal for himself and his family and writ large. And that was, he got to choose where he wanted to go live in exile. He got sort of a promise from the French generals and the Duc d'Aumale, who was the governor general, that they would lobby for the acceptance of this agreement by the French crown. They did say, we'll do this because this was amazing. Nobody had ever even seen the emir. He was like a ghost, they could never find him, except one guy, Bugeaud, who did it in the context of negotiating a treaty. He actually saw him and described him as looking like Jesus Christ. And some of the French paintings sort of reflect that. So he made a rational decision, and he got his chieftains to agree with him, and to finally say, okay, let's settle. And then when he got to France, they had said, well, we got to, we just can't take you right away. We got to find a place to put you because this is all very sudden and unexpected. Nobody ever thought that the emir would sort of turn himself in, which he did and negotiated. And then you had a change of government in France. The monarchy got kicked out, and well, what do we do with this? What do we do with him? So he basically spent 5 years in France while they diddled around trying to figure out, because most of the French population thought of him as just a savage, pretty much the way people do today, who hate the Algerians and hate the Arabs and hate Muslims. I mean, there's enough of that around that it can be rekindled very easily. So to know the real story about him is very refreshing and counter to the stereotypes that we have today still, which are not really that much different than they were in France back in the 18th, 19th century. So little changes, very little change. In fact, might even be worse because you can spread bad information even faster today. But I think that he's a personality that does create some discord among, I think, Algerians, maybe more than anyone else, because he was accused of being dictatorial and trying to force people into an alliance to fight the French. A lot of the tribes actually were perfectly happy doing business with the French and trading. So it wasn't as if he was universally loved even back then. And he was this young Arab who was, half the age of some of the leaders of these other groups. And so it's complicated.
Mm-hmm. It is complicated. Thank you for that overview. That was really interesting. We only have maybe about 5 minutes left here, but I wanted to ask Kathy, because some people on YouTube are asking, to share your impressions of Algeria. You've been to Algeria, what, 5 times? More than that? Could you share what you liked about Algeria, kind of what you saw, what your impressions are of Algerian people?
Yes, I've been there about 5 or 6 times. I should really get down those dates. I loved going to Algeria, and I would return in a heartbeat. In fact, I was supposed to go a year ago, April, and because of COVID, I was not able to go. But I think it's very important. So the first time I was there with the government, and that was different from the other times that I went. But I found the people to be so hospitable. Your history is rich. I think there are, 7 or 8 UNESCO sites. I got to go to a few. I visited the Kasbah, visited Tipaza. They were beautiful. And I can't say that I've been to a lot of parts in Algeria, but just to Algiers, Oran, and the Mascara area. I really respect the traditions, the clothing, and the value for what their history has to bring forward. The tiles, and the costumes, the dress. I'm very fond of coral. So you see, that's why I wear my necklace today. I like the coral jewelry. I think that's a rich tradition too. And the people are very, very welcoming. That's the first time that I really went to a table and with 3 other people ate lamb. I hadn't done that before. You know, the way the dinners are presented, that just opens a whole new door, you know, for me. And to visit with different people from different walks of life. I was invited to a school, Khalifa School in Mascora, which was marvelous. They were learning English, so I shared our PowerPoint presentation about what we do. And by the end, everyone was reading it with me, and I thought it was great. So it's dealing with all the individuals and the groups that I found very, very marvelous. I enjoyed all of it, and I would go back in a heartbeat.
Thanks for that. I also really love the tiles and the culture and Algerian people, so I can understand all of that. I'm wondering, Kathy, you, as I mentioned earlier, were in the Peace Corps when you were younger. You travel, you've been to Algeria a lot. You obviously think that cross-cultural exchange is extremely important. You have a whole organization dedicated to this. But I'm curious, why? Why is it important to share what you've learned about other cultures or share things on your travels? What is the importance?
Well, it's interesting because growing up in Elkader, I really did not have an opportunity to travel. The first time I traveled really was after I was married. And so not having gotten to experience other cultures, that was fascinating. My husband actually did volunteer work in Kyrgyzstan, and I asked if I could go along. So I went, and that's where I asked to visit a school. So actually that was my first encounter with another culture. And what is amazing, our interpreter is in Dubai today. And so I still keep track of him and his family back in Kyrgyzstan. So I like building the relationships. I think we are all one. You know, we are all human beings caring about each other. And I think when we can learn about something that's outside of our backyard, I think we can easier pull together what we have common ground on. And of course, nowadays, since meeting John, I tell the Abdelkader story wherever I go. When I spoke in Algiers in 2008, my last words, I promise you, I will speak about Abdelkader to all who will listen. And I am truly continuing to do that.
Yes, you are. Thank you for that. John, I'm curious if you want to add anything to that on the importance of cross-cultural exchange, since this is so much what you do too.
Well, I think it also depends on what your mindset is. Some people come with fixed ideas and they either don't have good experiences or one thing or another, they come away with their prejudices reinforced. I think what's cross-cultural thing should be educational at a minimum, but I think what was really important is that you take people one at a time as they are, you know, whatever their skin color or religion or sex. I think that cross-cultural experiences, cross-cultural. I've been here in the United States and in Virginia. That's happening all around. You don't have to go to Russia to have a cross-cultural experience. It's just that I think it's what your frame of mind is. Were you going to learn and appreciate the differences, or are you going to sort of compare everything to what's happening here at home and saying, oh, well, we do it better or we do it worse too. I think there's an attitude that you bring with you that plays a key role.
Mm-hmm.
Emily, I just wanted to share one last thing. I am a lifelong learner. When you say, what do I get out of this and why do I do it? It's because I'm a lifelong learner.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. That's a good thing to strive for us all to be. I think we'll end on that note. Both of our guests, thank you so much. Kathy Garms, thank you so much. John Kaiser, author of Commander of the Faithful, The Life and Times of Emir Abdelkhader. Again, we had both these guests on to talk about the 175th anniversary of Elkader, Iowa. So congratulations on the anniversary of your town. Thank you so much for sharing. It's a very interesting story with us. And thank you so much to everyone on YouTube for tuning in. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss talks like these, which we do most Wednesdays. Everyone have a great night. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Thank you.